2 minutes remaining in the half. Pell still shooting 64%. Mid-range, Brandon.
Yeah.
Kid's still there.
You have to find the hot hand and ride that hot hand.
Zone is now.
What is up, Pacers Nation? You are listening to the Pacers Post Up, brought to you by the brothers of basketball, Brad and Ryan. Pacers are reeling out of the All-Star break. Some of the worst performances of the season. We're breaking it all down. Offense, defense, what is going on right now? Lineup changes needed. How are things working out with Siakam? Can we do something with Ben Sheppard? And why can't we defend superstars in this league? We appreciate you guys listening. Be sure to check us out on all of our social media channels. This is the Pacers Post Up. All right, we are back. You guys are listening to the Pacers Post Up. We are kind of reconvening here for the first time since the All-Star break. We kind of did an entire episode recapping that, so if you want to check that out, it is up on the page. But today, we were really previewing at that time this critical stretch of 26 games, jockeying for playoff positioning. I think at that time we were sitting in 6th or 7th.
Yeah.
When that podcast was recorded, and today we're in 8th. We've gone 3-3 in the first 3 out of the gate. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster ride, is how I would kind of characterize it, where you've had some really high highs with a win at home over the Dallas Mavericks, which was arguably maybe one of our best complete,
that's the word I was literally going to use.
Yeah, just complete games of the year. You had production from everybody. You didn't need Tyrese to be, extremely good, although I think he had 17 and 11 or something in that game. Don't quote me on that, but then you had some of the lowest of the lows, an absolute ass whooping at the hands of the New Orleans Pelicans just last, Friday? And we had beat them, 2 nights earlier. So it's been a little bit of it's just been a little bit of up and down roller coaster, Jekyll and Hyde, whatever you want to call it. So I think where we want to dive in today, Ryan, is really just to say, okay, where are we at with this team? We've got 20 games left. We're 8th overall in the Eastern Conference, and we can maybe talk about seeding and games and where the tiebreakers lie and all that. But I guess coming out of the All-Star break, 3-3, what are your thoughts? How are you feeling about this group right now that, we talked before jumping on. Are they reeling? I don't know, but it's been a wildly inconsistent restart here after All-Star Indy.
Yeah, if you listen to a lot of Pacers media right now, I think there's a fair amount of panic, honestly. Maybe that's the wrong word, but just a lot of people feel, what's going on here? Why haven't we figured this out? We've had a couple easy games. We still struggle against some of these. You can see that with the Spurs game that we just lost, where these lower teams we can't beat, and a lot of teams are kind of we're trying to see what's going on. And, it's one of those things where you got to look, even I go back, we were talking All-Star, you can go back to the trade deadline. We lose Bruce and Buddy, key rotation players, add Siakam, Nembhard's in a new role. It's kind of like starting over. I mean, I was looking today at a lot of our lineups per se, and our starting lineup of Nembhard, Nesmith, Siakam, Turner, and Halliburton has only played 126 minutes, which is really only like 2 games worth of time, 2 full games. So it's one of those things, when you get a new team, we see this a lot in free agency when new players, when you sign new teams, like I think back to even like when LeBron went to the Heat for the first time, they were like 9-9 through their first 18 games or something. Everybody was panicking. It takes some time. So my panic meter, I would say, is probably lower than what I get a feel for just from the average fan.
Yeah.
But with that said, there are some things that we just still haven't solved yet, and we'll get into it. I know we want to hit on a lot. I've dug into a lot of the defense, actually. There's a lot of, since the Buddy Hield trade, people have been talking a lot about the offense and kind of overlooking the defense still, whereas adding in Nembhard, getting Siakam, you'd want to see improvements on that end.
For sure.
And we really haven't seen much of that.
Well, I think let's kind of break it down like this, because I'd like to talk a little bit offense. You've got some defense to talk about. I think for the audience, we're talking about all of this in the context of, at least for I don't want to speak for you, Ryan, at least roster fit, lineups, how we are grading out, so to speak. And so, just starting on, start with expectations, and that's really the biggest thing that we're talking about here is, and to put it in perspective, and I think a lot of the people like you just hit on that are maybe have the panic meter at a 7 or an 8 where we could be at a 4 or 5, something like that. I think it does come down to expectations. So I'll just break it down briefly. We enter this season, I think the over-under on our wins was like 38 and a half, something like that, okay? We are currently sitting at 34 wins. Barring an absolute catastrophic meltdown, we're going to outpace it. Now, a couple things have happened. Tyrese Halliburton's ascension has been ahead of plan, I think. We got some early wins against big teams, made the in-season tournament run. Then we make a transaction that's very clearly a win-now transaction. Yep. And you and I said it at the time. What was the minimum that was set there? The goal was now 6th seed.
Yep.
Right? So it was like,
get out of the play-in.
You've got to get out of that play-in because there's so much parity, so much uncertainty. A team gets hot. I heard somebody this afternoon talking, about, well, because today we're in the play-in. What does that matchup look like against an Atlanta team if they get hot or something like, it's one game. So your whole season, you don't want to be in that spot. So the expectation meter ratcheted up a little bit. And then I think we all fall victim to this. Some of the national media things start to come in. Can Tyrese be that?
Well, that
guy?
comes with the All-Star break too. Everybody's here. The ESPN crew, the TNT crew. We talked about how just Tyrese has been very involved in the media in a great way as an ambassador for the city. You get Siakam in, and it's like you said. Everybody's like, all right, we should be better. We should be 6th seed or above. And the truth is, I still think, that's probably where we want to be. But the East is deep in that sense of like the 2 through 8 are basically kind of still all jumbled, although, the high end are still kind of pulling away. So it's one of those where I don't know where you're going with that. So, but yeah.
Well, no, I think what I'm trying to get at is the expectation, I think, for a lot of fans is what you hit on earlier, which is we acquire Siakam, we should be better. Yep. Right? And I think how that oftentimes plays out is not how the fans think it should. And I think what we're going through right now, our record is somewhere around 500 since we've acquired Siakam. Granted, Tyrese was on an injury, All-Star break, Neesmith spent time out. There's been all kinds of different lineup anomalies, if you will, but we're about 500. And so when you start to peel the onion back a little bit, particularly on the offensive end of the floor, I just want to talk about that briefly, and then we can kind of dive into some of the defensive stuff. But you lost a couple of things in that transaction. Okay, you lost. Well, I'm gonna lump the Buddy thing into that too because that was really, I know it was a couple weeks later, but it was part of it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Shooting, gravity, movement, spacing, things like that. And you've heard Tyrese say this. Tyrese is probably now our best shooter. So
for sure,
you have seen more action with Siakam handling the ball, Nembhard handling the ball, Tyrese kind of being asked to move without the ball, and I'm not sure that that's ever something. I know he probably did it early in his career in Sacramento, and I haven't watched enough of that tape or any of it, frankly, to know that for certain. Yep. But I do think we are seeing a slowdown. Our pace has dropped, where we were first in the league, and now we're somewhere around, 7, 8, 9, 10.
It's 8, yeah.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle there of the top 10. So our pace has slowed down. I think we're shooting at a lower clip. I think we're seeing more isolation basketball. And I'm not laying that necessarily at the feet of Siakam, but he is an isolation player in a lot of instances, particularly in the half court. I think we have struggled, continued struggle on the defensive end, and maybe you want to talk about some of this. We're not scoring as much in transition. Nope. We're not getting out and running and getting those easy buckets. And frankly, we're just not making shots right now. Yeah. And that I went back and watched the first quarter in particular of the Spurs game from the other night because, to put that in context, you're coming off of a terrible loss. And you would think, okay, we're going to come out of the gate and try and do something here against a San Antonio team that has had some really nice wins lately, but is still a bottom barrel team, a sub 30% winning percentage team. And we just didn't have it. But a lot of the looks were not that bad. We were generating good shots, and we just weren't knocking them down. And that's, I think it's easy for Carlisle to and he has in post-game media availability said, when shots aren't falling, there's not a lot we can do about that. It's more about process. Are we getting the right looks? And rewatching that quarter, we were 1 of 11 from deep. But I thought we got good shots. I mean, I don't know if you had that same feeling when you were watching it, but I was out at dinner and the game was on, so I had to go back and rewatch it. But are you getting the sense that we're getting good shots, or am I off base here? Because I felt like we were getting good looks and just not knocking them down.
I am definitely with you on that. I don't think our quality of looks, obviously losing Buddy and a volume shooter like that, you don't just look at percentages. It's these guys who put up a lot of threes. But I'm with you that we've gotten a lot of good looks. We've all kind of seen, I'm sure you have the Tyrese stats pre and post injury.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where I look at Tyrese's shots and I don't think they look any different. He's just cold. I mean, it's just one of those things where throughout the season you go through these slumps. Every team does it. And it is where we're getting decent looks and the shots aren't falling. And obviously the Buddy Hield loss look definitely hurts. So I was looking through a few things on the shooting numbers, and I like to look at a lot of volume because you look at our lineup and basically everybody that we play can shoot out of 3J, who I love, but TJ McConnell, I call him 3J. But really almost everybody can put it up, but not everybody is a movement volume shooter like Buddy Hield is. So I was actually looking at our team and looked at who we had in terms of just total 3-point attempts compared to the league.
Okay.
And Buddy was 14th on the list.
Yep.
Tyrese is 27th. Who do you think our next guy is, and where on the list do you think they fall?
Oh, man. I'm going to say our next guy is probably Turner, and I'm going to say he's in the 80s or 90s.
So it's Neesmith, and he's 99.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So our 2 volume shooters, Halliburton and Neesmith, are 27th and 99 now. And with that, you kind of hinted at, they've definitely tried to have, because Tyrese, Nembhard in that starting 2 position has shot the ball well, actually, but he's not a movement or a volume shooter.
No.
So what they've tried to do a little bit is put it in Nembhard's hands and let Tyrese move without the ball a bit, which in theory sounds great, but the problem is Tyrese just has to have the ball. And Nembhard's playmaking, we've seen him kind of struggle in that when we put him in the TJ McConnell role where he's running the ship. I don't know if the playmaking's fully there.
Right.
He's definitely got nice vision, nice moves, can handle the ball, but losing that volume shooter has definitely changed the offense. And then you hinted at adding Siakam into the lineup. It's just one of those things. He likes to operate in that mid-post a lot, we've seen.
Yep.
And so it just changes how we're doing things, and that's where I kind of hinted out earlier. It's one of those things where it just takes a little time with these teams, and that's where when we say our panic button's a little lower, I will give them more time to mesh, if that makes sense.
Well, I think we don't really have a choice. I mean, I agree with you. I'm not just saying that to say it. I agree with you, but the reality is, we're pretty well committed to this thing, and I don't think that it's. Listen, it's 21, 22 games, something like that. This is not, the end of the world. It's just, I think we are seeing exactly what you said, and this is the point that I really wanted to key in on. Tyrese Halliburton is most effective with the ball in his hand. Mm-hmm. While he is a great shooter, and I understand that when you have a lot of length being thrown at him, or they're trapping him, or they're picking him up full court, all things that we've seen, I understand the advantage of maybe getting the ball out of his hands for a couple possessions here and there, letting somebody else take that load, but he needs to have the highest usage rate on the team. He needs to be the one that has the ball in his hands, and I think we've seen that. Caitlin Cooper's done some deep dive stats and things on Twitter. I don't want to steal her thunder or anything, but go look at, she talks about how his usage has looked different in terms of number of screens and actions and things that he's done with or without the ball in his hands. And I think we have a little bit of a question mark around, I would argue, this Nembhard Halliburton backcourt. And I'm curious, as we kind of, at some point in this podcast get into the defensive side of things, I'm curious how you think some of that stacks up, because just as someone watching the game and basically observing what you're talking about, which is this lack of movement shooting, lack of volume shooting, I think if there's anybody that's going to be on the chopping block from a lineup change perspective, Nembhard's the first name that I would go to.
I would say you're 100% right. We go from a wing. We're looking for a 4 all year. We're committed. Nembhard, I think, is going to be the 2 throughout the season, hopefully the playoffs, all that. But there will be a question, I think, this offseason of can we improve that position? Now, it gets tough because there are not many movement shooters out there who can defend. If you look at the high list, it's a lot of Kevin Herters and those guys, and they're not going to change anything, which, I'll get into the defensive numbers a little bit. We like Nembhard's defense and playing, but he's still a little undersized at that position, so the defense still hasn't risen enough since that lineup change with Nesmith and those guys in there too. Well, Nesmith's been out a little bit, but I definitely think there's going to be a question at the 2 come this offseason. But right now, he's the one we're rolling with. And it's not even to say, I actually think, post-trade deadline, post-All-Star, he's played pretty well.
Yeah.
The shots there. I always like his defense, his positioning, the way he uses his body to stay in front of people. He's a very physical defender, even though, his size you wouldn't think that.
Right.
But, yeah, there's definitely something still missing in that starting lineup.
Well, I want to throw this at you because I agree with everything you said. I don't think we're going to see a change. I listened to Rick Carlisle calls in on local radio on Tuesday mornings to it's the Wake Up Call with Kevin and Andy, and he was talking this morning, and they do a good job of kind of giving him the opportunity to talk about, okay, is it lineups or what and Rick a lot of the times is, well, it's our compete level, we don't come out with enough force, etc. But I think Rick acknowledged that that's something that they've looked at. I don't think we see a change unless we rattle off another 3 or 4 losses in a row or something like that, and then the pressure mounts. But I am curious your thoughts on this because I agree. Nembhard has done well. I think he has done what you've asked him to do in that role and excelled in it. But I think it comes down to more of a stylistic fit with that first unit. And it's the same problem that we've had, frankly, with Benedict Mathurin, albeit a little bit different because the reason you're putting Mathurin in that 2 spot is not necessarily the same reasons you're putting Nembhard in that spot, but neither of them are that movement shooter player. And I guess I want to pose this question to you. Is there a scenario in your mind, talking about defense and shooting, is there a scenario in your mind where you think Ben Sheppard...
I was waiting to see if that's where you were going.
And it's what I've been thinking about this whole time. I'm like, the kid's shown himself, so I don't know. Where do you think that that's even a realistic possibility at this point?
I'll say this. Do I think Rick starts Sheppard under normal circumstance, say no injuries moving forward the rest of the season? I would say 5% chance or less.
Okay.
With that said, I would be very, very intrigued to see it. Now, we don't totally agree with all of Rick Carlisle's rotation decisions, Jarris Walker, but
right.
I'm with you only because that allows the Nesmith Sheppard gives you a little bit more size there, a little bit more physicality. Does Sheppard look worse defensively against the starters? That's one thing you have to take into account. He's mostly rolling with bench players, but the shooting has come around. I was looking, I believe, since the trade deadline, he's actually shooting like 50% from deep on like 3 attempts. So, and we've always said we love his form. And that's where even, I'm going to go a little off topic, the volume shooting can be answered internally. Nesmith needs to shoot more. Sheppard can shoot more. Mathurin, he likes to go to that step back 3. A lot of times in college, he used to have more of that movement coming around screens. I wonder if you can get that involved somehow.
Okay.
I would be very intrigued to see Sheppard move in. I mean, you want to say, like, no, you can't put a rookie there. I mean, Nembhard started all last year as a rookie there. He's only a second-year player. And I do think with the addition of Siakam, you don't need... Because even with Tyrese, you have to have a second ball handler in there. And Nesmith can handle the ball, but he is not a ball handler, playmaker like that. So you need one more. But that is Siakam now. He can run the pick and roll. He can run a little bit of the offense. I think he's somewhere in like 4.5 assists since starting with the Pacers. So I think with that now, it opens that door even more. So if it were me, I would love to try it or even close with that. That's one thing. I don't really care as much Rick loves to close with different lineups than he start, at least with the current way we're constructed. So we've seen him close kind of some games, so I would love to see it. I assume you were on the same boat.
Yeah, yes. It was a leading question. Yeah. And here's what it comes down to. I mean, when you actually hit exactly the point that I was going to make, is that when Nembhard entered the starting lineup, it was Tyrese, Nembhard, Nesmith, Jalen Smith, and Turner. Mm-hmm. So you talk about the two ball handlers, and that was Nembhard when he came into that lineup. Now, with the addition of Siakam, and frankly, there's two things I wanted to hit on with Siakam. You hit one of them, which was he can be your secondary ball handler.
For sure.
Okay? But also, the ball has a tendency to stick more with Siakam than it has in this offense. I mean,
even with Bruce and Buddy, they were always bouncing, screening, cutting, moving.
And Obi was the same way too. And so when you have that happening, and I do think it is still to our benefit. I'm not trying to cast this ball sticking in a negative light as it reflects on Siakam necessarily, because I think there's a time and place to have a guy that can go get a bucket, but I also look at it and I say, okay, if you've got Siakam and you've got Tyrese and you've got Nembhard who needs the ball in his hand and he has a tendency for the ball to stick. Same thing with Matherin, the ball tends to stick. And they've been playing a lot of McConnell and Tyrese lineups. He's like one of the first guys off the bench, and TJ is very ball dominant. So I would love to see the knock on Sheppard, and I guess this is where I'm trying to get at. The knock on Sheppard is that he's passing the ball too quickly. Yeah, right.
That he's not looking for his own offense.
He gets the ball, and it's like he just immediately looks to get rid of it. And part of that is not a bad thing in my mind. Now, you want him to look for the shot if it's there, and he started to do that. There's a very small sample size of that in the last 10 or so games, let's call it. But I do think from a stylistic and fit perspective, there's a stronger argument that you might think. You talked about it. Nembhard's just a second-year player. Matherin's a second-year player. Frankly, they're probably the same age as Sheppard because Sheppard was a 4-year college player.
This is Nesmith's really only second real minutes year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. He was not getting a lot of run in Boston, and last year was kind of his breakout from a production and minutes played standpoint. So I don't think if you're Rick Carlisle, you can rule it out, I guess. And maybe injuries force your hand or what have you. But I also think the point you made is get that lineup on the floor. See what it looks like. Doesn't have to be the starting lineup. You don't have to make the shakeup, but give them some run, in a third quarter and see how things gel. Because I think that's where the fans, to bring this back to the beginning, that's where the fans I think have been frustrated, is that we look out of sync. Yeah. And we haven't been a great first half team all year, but we're not seeing the runs. We're not seeing Tyrese skipping down the floor after an 8-0 run with a couple of threes and a no-look pass or whatever. We're just not getting that. And some of it's pace, some of it's lack of transition. It's not having as many shooters on the floor. And this coaching staff's got to figure that out because I know we want to touch on some defensive things, but I'll just hit this briefly before I kind of hand it over to you. We're in 8th place in the East right now. We've had opportunities since returning to All-Star to, frankly, get 5th or even sniff the 4th seed. There was a scenario where had we won and New York lost, we would have been a half a game out of 4th a couple of nights ago. And it's clearly gone the other way. And I think it's worth noting that right now we are a full game behind Miami in the 7th seed. Right now, I think we have split the season series 1-1. I think they have a better, whatever that next tiebreaker is, and I have it off the top of my head, but I think they own that currently. We have another game against them coming up on April. Let me see if I've got the schedule. It's April 7th or 14th. It's one of those weekend games, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Sunday, April 7th. So we're going to close out the season, one of our last few games against the Heat. But they have the third easiest schedule or the second easiest schedule for the remainder of this year. The Magic, we're done with the Magic. They have won the season series. We're a game and a half behind them. and they're going to own whatever tiebreak is there.
And those two teams are playing really well. The Magic are 8-2 in their last 10, and same with the Heat. And even Philly, without Embiid, they were on the downslope. They've gotten back a little bit into a normal stretch as well. So it's tough. Yes,
it's going to be a challenge, because if you look at it right now, and I'm just going Orlando Magic this month alone. Okay, They started with the Pistons, which they won. They've got Hornets, Wizards, Nets, 2 Raptors, Hornets again, Grizzlies.
Talk about the bottom of the East.
That's all in the month of March. So that presents a major challenge for us. And if you look at Miami, it's not a lot different. They are this month, if you will. They got a win against the Jazz today. They're home against the Pistons. They've got Wizards, 2 more in Detroit this month. And then, 76ers, Wizards again, Blazers. So it really is a very easy schedule on paper for the teams closest to us in the standings. Now, if you jump up a couple of spots, the beauty of where we are at right now is that while we're a game back or a game and a half back of Miami and Orlando respectively, we're really only 2 games back of Philly and 2.5 games back of New York for the 4th and 5th seeds. And those teams we both hold the tiebreak against. So there's still so much opportunity with 20 games left.
One run, and the East is totally changed. 1 slump, 1 run, which is basically kind of what's happening right now.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And so, tonight we've got a game on the road in Dallas, and a team that we just beat. I'm sure they're going to be motivated. There's question marks about Luka.
We talked about this on the last podcast, where we have a lot of these. We just saw this with New Orleans. We're going to play Toronto again, where these teams where you play them not back to back per se. We did with New Orleans, but short time in a 1 week stretch, it's tough to beat them twice. We blew out the Pelicans, and then they blew us out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, because if you look at our March schedule, it's nothing like that. It does not get easier. We come home on Thursday against the Timberwolves. Yep. We've got at Magic on Sunday, at Thunder on Tuesday.
Who are reeling.
Bulls, Nets, Cavs, Warriors, Lakers, Clippers, Lakers again. I mean, those are all...
Lakers are playing well, too.
Lakers are playing well, and it's a bad matchup. We saw that in the in-season tournament. The Clippers blew us out. A couple of... I think that was the first game back after the in-season. No, it was the first game back after the road trip after the in-season tournament, and they put it to us at home. But we've got to start to see things come together here. That's the bottom line. And we can dissect schedules all we want, but it just comes down to winning games. So, defensive side of the ball, I feel like I've talked this whole time. Where are we at on the defensive side?
So I want to preference this, because this is going to be, at least when I get into this, a little bit of a shot on Rick Carlisle. And I don't mean that because I love Rick. I hated having coaches when we had Nate McMillan and Bjorgen, where we're kind of always coming for him. I like the steadiness. Rick is great on the offensive end. The in-game adjustments, he's always up there in names with like Ty Lue and Spoelstra for in-game adjustments. Our offense has been phenomenal since he's joined. I don't want him gone. I want him here, and then maybe even move up somewhere in the office if he wants to stop coaching in a couple of years. With that said, we need to address... We talk a lot of defense, but that's kind of with the All-Star break, the cherry deadline gone away. So I first wanted to take a bigger high-level view. So I just looked back, because the Pacers, at least growing up when I know, we were known as a defensive team through the Vogel era, the McMillan era, even a little in the Bjorgen, the short period. So if you look back, I look back to 2017 through now and just took the NBA defensive ratings. Where did we rank in the league?
Okay.
And so in 17, we were 12th. 18, we were 3rd. 19, we were 6th. And 20, we were 14th.
Okay. Wow.
And 21 is when Rick Carlisle took over.
Yeah.
We are 28th and 21, 26th and 22, and this year 26th as well.
Wow.
So no real improvement. And I don't want to say they're not addressing it, because if you listen, like even this year in the offseason and last year, Rick will say 3/4 of our practice and training camp and all that is on the defensive end. But it's clearly not working.
Yeah.
Whatever they're doing has not worked. And then I wanted to go, all right, we haven't had the best lineups for defense. I particularly think our current starting lineup should at least be somewhere in the league average defensively.
Yeah.
So I looked post-trade deadline. That's when Nembhard's been starting Siakam. Nesmith has missed some time, but just wanted to get a feel. And we are still defensive efficiency, 24th, and points per game defensively. I know our pace is high, so we give it up. We're third to last still in the league. So it hasn't taken a big jump.
Yeah.
And I don't want to just be like, all right, so we're not playing good defense, but why? So I tried to look back at the games and see what's the pattern, why are we giving up these points? And I found one thing that was very interesting. We always hear this in the NBA. The stars are going to get theirs, and then we got to, tamper everybody else.
Yeah.
I think the Pacers need to get rid of that fucking philosophy.
Okay.
So I looked back. So post-trade deadline, we've had 10 games, and 9 out of 10, the star players. So I just looked at each team. Like if you're playing the Warriors, Steph, the Raptors, Scotty or Barnes, and etc. 9 out of the 10 times they've scored over their average. So here's a couple of their games. Steph 42, Brunson 39, Barnes 29, Cade 30, Luka 33, Ingram 30 and 34, Wemby 31.
Wow.
So I looked back at that even and took their, points per game average compared to what they score. And over that stretch, they are scoring, on average, 9 points per game more than their average.
Wow.
The star player of the team is scoring 9 points. Now, that is a lot. I don't, 20-point averages goes to 30, basically.
Yeah, that's a 50% jump almost.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where I think at some point, and maybe that doesn't hold all season, but it kind of feels like it does. I did a little bit, didn't want to do all the numbers. We saw Booker go off. These guys.
Giannis has gone off twice,
What's
50
what I mean?
plus, 60 plus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so at some point, we have to slow down these stars. Now, double teaming, blitzing, switching, matchups. We liked what we did on Zion. We slowed him down, but Ingram still got his, and he's really the lead scorer of that group.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to pretend I know the X and O's well. I don't want to tell Rick, obviously, how to do his job, but this is something, that I do. If you, as a Pacers fan, think back to all these stars we play, and it does feel like these guys do go off on us extra.
No question about it.
And so that's a clear point to me where I don't want to say just cut their 9 points because shots will beat. But if you look at if you can cut that to like 3 or 4 above their average, all of a sudden we're probably closer to the middle of the league.
Yeah. That is digging deep.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I obviously didn't have this stat to back it up, but I do understand it from a feel perspective. It feels like these players are always having career nights, and we've given them up. It's seemingly, all throughout. Even in the games, I'd be curious to go back and look to, to some of these games where we've let worse teams hang around. And, I remember, I think we won the game against Charlotte, but it was like Brandon Miller had 40 some odd points. We're just, we're allowing them to get going. And when you do that in a star-driven league and the best players are having great nights or career nights against you, you're bound to lose some close contests. I just don't see any way around that. So
and for a while, I think we held our hat on it was the wings that were killing us. And it's like, if we just get a wing in here to solve this, all of a sudden the Tatums and those guys don't kill us as much.
Right.
But since doing that and adding more defense with Nembhard in the lineup, it still hasn't resulted. And again, I know it's not a huge sample size, but we have to. In Rick Carlisle's tenure, we have not improved defensively at all. And for as much as they talk, I know when he started, Lloyd Pierce was kind of the defensive coordinator. Now I know Jenny and Mike are kind of tag teaming that as well. I don't know exactly, but if I'm in that locker room, I'm telling the guys, you know what? Luka's not getting his fucking shit. We are going after him. He's going to score 20 points, and if Kyrie goes off, then maybe he does. That's a tough example because Kyrie's so good. But it's one of those things where maybe there needs to be more attention on these stars. Find a way, because it can't happen where 9 out of 10 games, their star player outplays their average. In the one game it wasn't, was the Hornets, and I didn't really even know who to choose on that. Is it Bridges? Is it Miller? LaMelo's out, who I would have chosen. But
Right.
So for that to be how it's going, actually the only other one was Luka, whose average is 34, and he had 33 against us, which is still a lot. But we won that game. It's one of those, and defensively we were good. So maybe there is a little rhyme and reason to slowing the Stars down. Obviously, it's so much easier said than done. I get these guys are uber talented. But we've seen it against Tyrese. Teams have switched it up. It's been harder for him to get going at times. So maybe we can apply similar strategies on their guys to see if the other guys on their team will beat us. Because right now it feels like the Stars are cooking us.
I'm kind of still trying to get my mind around that, but I would tell you it's very interesting. And I think as illuminating as the Stars outscoring us by almost 9-10 points per contest over that stretch, I think I did not know that we were that bad in terms of defensive rating 3 years in a row. Relative to the rest of the league. And at a certain point, I've heard Rick talk about the schematics and how the defensive scheme that they run is. I think he said it's the same scheme as the Magic run, and a lot of it is predicated on minimizing 3-point attempts for the opposition. And I wish I had it in front of me. I just tried to look this up. There was something that came across my feed the other day that talked about defensive rating or wins relative to the teams who were limiting their opponents to the fewest 3-point attempts. And what it was one of those kind of graphics that had the teams plotted throughout the chart. What it found was that the teams that were keying in on limiting 3-point attempts were some of the worst defensive teams in the league. And I think part of it is if we're running a similar scheme to Orlando, and again, that's just going off the top of my head. I'm thinking about this as you've talked about it, whether we are or we aren't. Let's say we are. Orlando, their length allows them to do a lot of different things than what we have. I think we have tried to do some different things to put a Band-Aid on Tyrese's individual defense. I think an area for growth, certainly for us this offseason, is he's going to have to step it up. He's going to have to figure out a way. We've talked about it. He gets his hand in passing lanes and things like that. He's had more deflections. I saw he had another block or two against the Spurs the other night.
His strength defensively is that reading the defense, off ball, getting into passing lanes. And I'll kind of give it back to you because when we go to games, you talk about it a lot. He is cheating a lot on these.
And we're getting, frankly, I saw it again in the San Antonio game watching it back. We're getting beat chasing after his cheat. He makes a cheat on one end of on one side of the half court, and the ball swings, and we're chasing, and it results in somebody getting an open look. I just think we have to figure out how to, apply force without taking unnecessary chances. It puts a lot of onus on our weak side defenders to come and help, and I feel like we are always chasing, and part of that is because we're trying to get people, I guess we're trying to run them off the 3-point line, and so we end up chasing on the backside and giving up easy buckets, and unfortunately that's not a recipe for getting out in transition, playing with pace, etc. And we saw that. There was no greater example of that than the Friday start in New Orleans, where they were like 20 of 22 from the floor, something to that effect. 0 defensive rebounds. You can't get out and run. They literally did not have a possession end without a conversion or potentially an offensive foul. So it just, that's where I think we have to look in the mirror. If I was, we talked about panic meter earlier. I am still more concerned defensively than I am offensively with this team, because I think it's why you have seen us lose to some of the bad teams, because we're, to your point, letting guys have career nights and play above their average. And when we're not defending at a high level, it impacts us on the other end of the floor. And so, we again, it's not going to get any easier. We've got Luka and Kyrie tonight, barring that Luka's not out with injury. We're going to have Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, among others, on Thursday. Shea right behind him, Chet, Williams, that whole deal. So, Carlisle's got his hands full. I guess, as we look at these next 20 games, Ryan, I just want to put this to you and kind of put you on the spot here. And I'll run it down here real quickly. We're a game back of 7th. We're a game and a half back of 6th. We're 2 back of 5th and 2.5 of 4th.
Yep.
Okay? And it's New York, Philly, Orlando, Miami, us. If you had to, bet $100 on our final seeding or where we land at season end, where do you think we fall, knowing what we have left and where we're at today?
So we did our whole gambling thing at the end of our podcast last time, post All-Star break. And I did actually look again today just to see where some of ours. So our win total still at 45 actually hasn't moved.
Really?
And then,
Interesting. Okay.
The playoff odds, which we said were a little too, it was minus 1,200, is now minus 550.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
And now the real one, though, is the play-in. So you can bet if we're going to be in the play-in, we are now minus 390 to be in the play-in.
Seriously.
We are the second most likely, according to Vegas, behind the Bulls, who find themselves pretty much guaranteed
Locked
to
in.
be in there.
Yeah.
Just how the records have worked out, it's pretty unlikely they could fall out. So if I had to be a gambler and I had to put it, it would be the 7th or the 8th seed.
Yep.
The good news is we've talked about this before. The Celtics are really the only draw where it's like, oh, we're screwed.
Yeah.
Because they are playing better than anybody in the league. I would still favor the Nuggets, but they're going to have a harder path coming through the West than the Celtics will the East.
Yep.
So at least if you get in the 7-8 game and you win it, you are the 7th seed, even if you are the 8th seed going into the play-in tournament. I will probably, if you had to put $100 on it, I would say I think the 8th seed is probably where we end up.
I do too. That was where my head was at coming into this, and it's crazy how much 6 games can do. I guess that's the fan in me is I'm a prisoner of the moment, so to speak. But the schedule is really why I'm saying that. I think Philly has shown an ability to kind of figure out a way to get some wins. Tyrese Maxey's playing well. They still have Tobias Harris. They added Buddy, who we already talked about. Obviously us missing some of what he brings. So I think it's going to be interesting, but I'm with you. I see us in that play-in. I think, and this is, I would almost never ask for Miami in a one-game series, but I think we really have to hope it's not at Orlando.
Yeah, that would be a tough one.
Frankly, because
their size is just tough for us.
The matchup has just not been there. I'm hoping...
The only thing there is their inexperience, even though, we're not really experienced in the playoffs either. Maybe that plays a little bit. Paolo, Franz, all these guys haven't played in huge games per se. Siakam and Turner have.
Yep.
So maybe you can get a little bit of the experience. Maybe Rick can dial it up. I'm with you matchup. Spoelstra is just one of those guys that when it comes time and winning, and Jimmy, although they did lose a play-in game, then had to win the second one to get in last year. So you never know, but I'm probably with you where, the Heat would feel. The truth is it would be nice to see maybe Philly fell, but the problem is if Philly falls, I'm guessing Embiid is back by that time. No guarantees, but... with Embiid back, then I guess it's the Heat, although all of them have challenges.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting how the dynamic has shifted so much. And, I still think the expectation, if you're in that locker room, has to be 6th seed or better. I mean, that is what you're fighting for. I think everybody has to be. And
we're saying this, we are not out of that by any means.
No, not.
You go 3-1 on this little trip. Now you could easily just go 1-3, but all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, can we go for the 5? It's one of those.
No doubt about it. And who knows? We've seen this. The one thing I will say is that you've got, whether it be Charlotte, Detroit for that matter, San Antonio, even Washington, Toronto, some of these teams that on paper are why an Orlando or a Miami have an easier quote-unquote strength of schedule remaining. A lot of them are playing good basketball.
Yeah.
You're starting to see, San Antonio did not look like a sub 30% winning percentage team when we played them, and they haven't for a little while now. You're starting to see some things come together. I think, obviously a team like Toronto, you've got an all-star in Scotty Barnes. Even a team like Detroit, Cade Cunningham's starting to play really well. And he presents challenges on a night-in, night-out basis. And Charlotte made all those moves, and they're starting to put some pieces together. I'm not saying that any of those teams will be favored. They won't. But we are going to need some help from, frankly, some of the teams that we've failed to be able to put away.
With the way the draft lottery is now set up, where you can basically at best have like a 12% chance of getting the number 1 pick, and just, what was I about to say? Either way, just there's no incentive to really lose. I was going to say, and with a weaker draft class, these teams, you're the Pistons, you're the San Antonio, you're like, it's kind of a coin flip anyway. We might as well win these games. It doesn't really change a lot. So, there's not a lot of incentive to lose. And, if you listen to a lot of the historians of the game, that's like Bill Simmons is the one that comes to mind. They all pretty much agree that the league is as deep as it's ever been. So the off nights aren't what we used to be, where you could just kind of roll the off teams. We always, especially the Pacers, were really good at that in the Vogel and McMillan years, where we could roll over the weaker teams, specifically the weaker East teams, and it's just not the case.
Well, we've seen that firsthand this year. The Pacers have not rolled. They have been rolled.
Maybe that's why you look ahead of the schedule and you go, hey, maybe it's good we're playing good teams.
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, I'm with you. I mean, you have to kind of say we've shown a propensity to get up for the bigger games, and I hope that I will say one more thing, because I think this is, and I don't want to put too much on one player, but I think so much of this is about Tyrese Halliburton. This entire year, in essence, has been about him. From the contract to the in-season tournament run to hosting All-Star starter, the All-NBA conversation. And I am confident. You can tell. I mean, he's 0-13 over the last 2 from deep.
He is frustrated, too, visibly.
Yeah, his usual demeanor, jovial, happy-go-lucky, positive guy is not there right now. And I've watched enough NBA basketball over the years to know that all it takes is one game, one good quarter, one little run to start to find your mojo. And so I think
we saw that with Sheppard shooting. He needed that 5-for-5 game, and since then he's found rhythm from deep.
He's been confident. He's been looking at the basket, and I really do think that we're a quarter away from having some of that. And I don't think anybody that's a fan of this team should be surprised that Tyrese Halliburton has hit a funk. This, we ran through it. I won't go through it again, but we ran through just some of his schedule, because I sure as hell don't know all of it, over All-Star break. And we talked about the over-under on number of hours of sleep and all that. He had to come out of that absolutely exhausted.
Well, and Brad, you can even go further back. He played in the World Cup this year. Then you go into the in-season tournament fall, which basically made a 2-week road trip. Then he's got his injury. Then he's got the All-Star break, which was not a break for him.
Not at all.
And then this year, he's going to be competing for, playing in the Olympics again. He's going, plus on top of all that, you have to realize, he's playing for a $50 million incentive this year.
Right.
I mean, and people kind of just glance over that. Like, that is I don't care how much money you're making. That is a huge incentive.
And you have to know he's thinking about that on a game-by-game basis.
No doubt.
In terms of...
You can't not. I don't care who you are. You can say, I'm just focused on the game. There's no way that's not... And he's admitted he came back too soon.
Yeah, and he just turned 24 years old. So you got to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. I hope for everybody's sake, because he is the guy that makes the whole machine run, right? And it's his energy and positivity and all that I think not only the team rallied around, but the fan base, it was infectious with all of us. And so I hope, maybe it's tonight against Dallas, who knows? But we've seen too much. He's too talented of a player. This is not, I'm providing an opinion here, but I do not see this as, Tyrese, overachieved early in the season. I believe he is who he is, and I think he is a future face of this league. I just think he's having a stretch right now that, you compile all those things that you just rattled off, and the fact that, we're fighting for playoff positioning and integrating new people into the lineup. And frankly, we haven't had any consistency because it seems like every time somebody gets healthy, another guy gets injured. I mean, we've had, Neesmith comes back, but then Doug and Sheppard are out. Jalen's still dealing with the back. That's what Carlisle said this morning, even though he did play against San Antonio. Be curious if he suits up tonight. But whatever.
And he lost. This is one thing, we talk about Buddy spacing and all this. They were basically like best friends, had always played together. I mean, you can relate in your life when you do something over and over again just at your job with one of your best friends and they leave and you replace it with somebody. It's awkward. It takes a second to get going, and he's talked about it. If you listen to the post game a lot, he's brought up Buddy a few times on how he moves and goes screens and all this with him. And I think that, he's never not played with him. Buddy was, one of the best shooters of all time. And so he'll figure it out. He's not going to keep going 0 for 6, 0 for 7 from deep. This guy's a shooter. We've seen it.
I think it comes down to he's trying to find his spots. How does he fit in the lineup that Carlisle's put out on the floor right now? And yeah, they're throwing different actions at him and picking him up full court, like I said before. But the beauty is there's always an answer. There's always, if you scheme one thing, there's always a counter to that, first punch, if you will. And I'm confident that Carlisle's as good as anybody at addressing that. So we've got the right people, in place, but it's been tough. And I really hope that we can get a win tonight because the next two are not any easier after that. So I know you've got one stat to share, a couple of stats to share. What do we want to finish with here?
I've got a couple shout-outs. One very quick one. Shout-out to T.J. Warren getting a 10-day contract with the Timberwolves.
Oh, nice. Didn't see that.
I hope it works out. He is a bucket getter who just went through some really unfortunate, really never even understood what was going on with him. I knew it was that foot and plantar fasciitis, but hope he can find his way back on the court. I'd love to see him. The second one, and I'm going to preference this a little bit saying, I am probably a huge supporter of getting crowd energy in a game, momentum building, all this. My favorite player by far of all time is Lance Stevenson, who was a mastercraft with the Indiana crowd of riling it up, getting momentum. I know Vegas says home court doesn't do a lot, as much at least as it used to, but it's still prevalent when you're in the building. With that said, Obi, can I interest you in an easier, simpler go-to dunk? Because the between the legs one is wild. It's awesome. I don't want you to totally bank it. But in the fourth quarter, when it's a 10-point game and it's been going back and forth a bit, going to the between the legs dunk is risky. We saw it in the Mavs game. He tried to. He traveled. And then he didn't get it between the legs. He kind of swooped it for a kind of like a windmill to the side.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their go-to dunks. If you look, Vic was the 360. Like Mathurin, he does the windmill if he gets the open court. LeBron's always had that tomahawk where he throws it as hard as he can. I don't know. Can I interest you in one of those, Obi? Off the backboard, something a little more easy. Like I said, don't want to completely abandon it. The energy you bring, you become a home crowd favorite almost immediately. I think everybody wants you back. Hopefully in this offseason we can figure it out somehow. There's a spot. You've been shooting well. That dunk is just something else.
It is. I mean, we all saw what happened in New York. And I didn't realize how often he's done it in game. There was a highlight reel that came out a couple days ago. He's done it in game a lot, and
he's done 4 or 5 at least for us this year. I was looking back with the Knicks previous years. It's clearly his go-to, and he is consistent. He's only missed it once with us, so I'm not trying to overblow it, but he's done it in all these not so I always think back, one of my favorite dunks in person I watched was the Paul George 360 windmill against the Clippers. But we were up 18, and that was to put it to 20. And it was awesome, but it was the cap on it, not the part of the run.
We're making the run, and we actually really need these 2 points to Obi has It's funny you say how you bring that up, because the one thing about Obi that I think drives fans nuts is his decision making has been a little suspect at time, whether it's that dunk or just some of the passes he makes, forcing things here and there,
dribbling at times,
for sure. But I listen, he's got other dunks. He's got to have. I mean, hell, the one that he in that Mavs game you're talking about, it turned out to be a pretty sick
it was
little
awesome.
windmill.
Yeah. You could do that where you could kind of cradle it and bring it around, but going between the legs is a wild, and he does it against I think it was the Knicks, or no, it was the Suns, sorry. You can see he looks back and then has one step to do it.
Yeah.
It's I don't even know how you do it. I mean, he's top tier athleticism in that, but yeah, if we can interest you in a tomahawk or kind of a windmill, something, at least when the game's close.
Yeah. I'm all in on that. I would love to see a switch up there from our friend Obi, and I'm with you. I hope we can get a deal done this offseason. It's and I know we're kind of bringing this for a landing. The challenge is we still have Jarris Walker,
who has to be in the rotation.
And I'll say this real briefly as we kind of sign off. Rick made some comments last week that indicated that he was really impressed by what Walker did in that Pelicans game, coming in. And I understand he didn't shoot the ball well, but I think he had 6, 7, and 6 or something like that.
A couple steals.
And they put him on Ingram later in the game, and Rick felt really good about how Jarris played in that matchup. And I think what Rick's takeaway was, or some of the soundbite from the post game was, he's earned the opportunity to get minutes, and we've told him to stay ready. So I hope he sees it, because I do think he has to factor in long term here, and maybe that impacts Obi. I'm not sure, but Jarris just sees the game too well. He's too gifted from an IQ and a feel perspective to not get him more time on the floor. So,
and I saw a few people on Twitter who I think he got beat on a couple back doors or rotations on defense. And they're like, oh, well, this is why he's not in the rotation. And I hate that argument, because it's he has to go through this.
Yeah.
The Pacers have struggled with player development, fact, at least of the young guys. So it's going to happen next year or this year. I'd rather it be going, and we're the 8th seed. So we're not... we're not so good where the Celtics, you can understand why they weren't playing Neesmith minutes, because they were competing for a championship.
For sure. And by the way, everybody on our team gets burned on back screens and stuff. I mean, we do it all the time.
I just said we're the third worst defense in the league.
It's not a Jarris Walker thing. I mean, granted, you've got to recognize, situational, whatever. If there's an opportunity for somebody to back screen you'd hope you're paying attention to that. But we see this team do it all the time. So we'll kind of bring it. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, and this is last. We've railed a little bit on this last section, but I wanted to share the stat. I kind of hinted it to you before the game that I found one. This might be my favorite Pacer stat ever, and I'm not exaggerating.
Yep.
I'm sure some of you saw it on Twitter. If you hadn't, get ready, because it's awesome. So, there have been 991 players that have played at least 5 times against LeBron James in their NBA career. Only one of them is undefeated. Who do you think it is?
Oh, God. It's got to be a Pacers player.
It is.
Only one of them is undefeated.
It's a trick question.
Yeah, so. I don't know. Who is it? I'm reeling. Who is it?
TJ Leaf.
Oh my God. Oh.
I saw that stat and was dying. We had one of our roommates was a ball boy and is still intertwined with all of them, and they were just blowing it up. They all love TJ, so I don't mean this to hate on TJ as a person or anything. Obviously, we were not fans of his game.
Right.
Nobody was. But I saw that stat of the 991 players who have played LeBron James at least 5 times in their career. TJ Leaf is the only one undefeated.
I got nothing. I can't top that. That is unbelievable. Kudos to TJ Leaf. Whatever you're doing in China, or is he even playing basketball anymore?
He was playing for the Ducks in China, but I don't believe he. He might be actually.
I know he's a big gamer. Yeah. Maybe he's playing Call of Duty or something. That is unbelievable. Well, you know what? Any shade you can throw on LeBron, I'm all for it. So I love that. And we've got the Mavericks on the road tonight. We'll see where the next week or so shakes out. Probably pick this up in a week and kind of continue the conversation on where we're at, where we're seated, what things are looking like. And hell, a lot can change in 4 or 5 games. So a couple other teams in action tonight too. It'll be interesting to see how it breaks down, and we'll talk to you soon.